Yeah.
Awesome.
What you know, good Akron? Well, you are listening to the AND Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson, and the Windy City representative, the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler.
Greetings.
Give me a round of applause. Now, before we get deep into this political commentary, something I want to tell people. First of all, let me say this. Thank you, everybody. Give yourself a round of applause for being here. Thank you, Akron. Christy Stats did an amazing job. And give Christy a round of applause, too. She did an amazing job leading our Akron chapter, getting all y'all out here. And it's just awesome to see everybody here. Thank you. We appreciate you. Sherilyn, thank you for all your help today as well. And everybody, everybody who was leading worship, thank you so much for what you've done and being a part of what we're trying to do here. But before we get deep into our political commentary, Chris, I want to very quickly just talk about our Civic Revival disciplines, because this is a part of our Civic Revival where we're going all around the country and we're just letting people know how we need to engage politics at this time. So what me and Chris did was we came up with 10 disciplines that we wanted to spread to help Christians not just say they were going to do better this time around when it came to the election, but to make sure we actually did better. So that's a real part of the tour, is our 10 disciplines. I'll give you one very quickly, and then I'll have Chris give you one. But if you want to see all our 10 disciplines, you got to go to our website, andcampaign.org, and.org, to see these disciplines. The one that I want to talk about, Chris, one of the ones that I think is most impactful, but they're all important, is our first discipline, which is to see people, not political abstractions. And this is something Chloe Valdery talks about really well. A lot of times we think we know somebody based on how they voted, either how they voted or where they stand on a particular issue. So if you voted differently than me, then I can put you to the side and say, I can basically have contempt for you. Or if you disagree with me on my most important issue, whether it be race or abortion or whatever, then I think I can place you in a certain box and really say you have nothing to contribute. There's really nothing I can learn from you, because your whole public witness or your experience is tainted by that one issue or by that one vote. We should know better than that as Christians. We're all struggling through the human condition. We don't know people just based on how they voted or based on one issue that they've come down on that we disagree with, okay? So I want you guys to focus on, for the rest of this election cycle, focus on not judging people completely based on their vote. Everybody is more than their vote. And if Christians approach it that way, it'd be a much better political landscape.
Yes. So if I point out one, I think it's discipline number 6. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But the discipline is to have an affirmative posture. And when we talk about when we have an affirmative posture, we live in a world where most people are practicing what we call opposition-centered politics. So it's not really about being for anything. The whole thing is that I'm not the other guy, and he's a lot worse. So that really distorts politics in a lot of ways, but it's a very bad approach for Christians, because we should be about something. I always say that I wish that they would have extended that line in the Negro spiritual, go down Moses and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. But when we read that in Exodus, God actually says, tell Pharaoh to let my people go so that they might worship me. And so it's not just about getting free, breaking chains, and bringing down what is wrong. It's also about a positive vision for what should be. So we challenge ourselves and we challenge you to really think about, what are the issues that I care about? What is the world that I would like to see in my community, in my state, in my country? And then shape your civic engagement around those issues. And I'll close it with this. Get the disciplines, because we go much more into all these things. But one of the things that a positive posture assumes is that we say no to the temptation in our culture to have to say something about everything. You don't have to say something about everything. We do a podcast, and we don't say something about everything. So you don't have to say something about everything. But the things that matter, that are part of your positive sort of disposition, those are the things that you research, that you engage in, and that you talk about.
All right. Well, we're about to get into the podcast. First, I want to give a shout out to all our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. We keep it raw in here, guys. We keep it Christian, but we also want to be very transparent, and we want to talk about issues in a way that you're not going to see in mainstream media. What that means is we need help from the church to get this type of resource out, to get this type of content out. So if you want to support us, you can always go to patreon.com/churchpoliticspodcast. When you sign up there, not only are you helping us continue the work, but you will get premium episodes, right? So there's episodes that everybody hears. There's other episodes that we have for people who are supporters on Patreon. Also, if you're watching on YouTube out there, make sure that you like and subscribe, all right? We're going to have a quick Q&A after Chris and I talk, so make sure that you get your questions ready. But y'all know what it is. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. Okay, Chris, I want to make this first one very quick. It sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, that the mayor from Philadelphia accidentally leaked Harris's campaign vice president announcement. So what you want to do is you want to make this a big announcement. You want to use this to add on to the momentum that you have. But it looks like this mayor leaked the video a few days early, which is not a good thing. So the video announces that Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is going to be the choice. Now, this could change, but it looks like that was the leak, and everything is leading to that. This is one of the first big mistakes of the Harris campaign that I can tell. What are your thoughts on Josh Shapiro being the VP pick?
That's a terrible mistake. Somebody's in a lot of trouble right now. But I think, politically speaking, I think Shapiro is probably a smart choice. When I play with the maps, I think as goes Pennsylvania, so goes the election. You got to win a bunch of states if you don't win that state. And so I think that bringing a popular governor from that state is a politically sharp decision. I think she's going to pay something in progressive circles, because I know a lot of folks that I talk to pay attention to the fact that Josh Shapiro compared the pro-Palestine protesters to the KKK. That might not, and he has some other issues in education. He doesn't. He likes charter schools. I also like charter schools, but some people don't. So it's always a mixed bag with the VP. But I would say on the whole, if she takes Shapiro, that's a smart choice. But it's gonna lose something from leaking.
Yeah. He's a pretty good communicator. I think he's been in the game for a while. He can take the questions and things of that nature. Now, there's some issues that maybe he paid someone off to get rid of some sexual harassment in his office and make it go away. Those issues are going to come up. And the problem with it leaking early is people can jump on those things before he gets to define himself. Yeah. And so that's why the campaign would never want you to do it. What's that?
Because it plays into like the disingenuous thing that they're already trying to, because they're doing like this whole public process, interviewing 7 people and all these types of things, and they already cut the announcement video.
Right. Right. So Buttigieg and all those folks who are getting these conversations during this week before the announcement, now they know that they are just fake and part of the game that is played on both sides of the aisle. All right, so I want to talk about something that was a big issue a couple of days ago, which is the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And before we even get into it, I'll be honest, when I turned on the opening ceremony, there was a cool part where you saw the different countries on the boats and stuff like that, but I had to check to make sure that I had it on the right station at first, because I was like, what in the world is this? Yeah. I mean, it was a bunch of drag queens dressed very, I guess, provocatively. And I'm just glad my kids weren't there. Because I was turning, I was like, wait, did I turn to the right thing? And then finally I saw some of the athletes. But the performance, I would have to say, was probably inappropriate. Aside from, the other issue that I'm about to bring up, I thought the performance was inappropriate. And here's what happens next. Some people felt like part of the opening ceremony was mocking the Last Supper, okay? And so there was this big blow up about it. At first you get Christians coming out saying, man, this is terrible. How could they do this? Blah, blah. I mean, it is France, which is like one of the most secular countries ever. It shouldn't be a huge surprise. But that's how people came about it. Then other people came back and said, no, this is about the Greek god Dionysus, and it's not even about the Last Supper. And there's this big back and forth. Here's two errors that I see in how we respond to things like this generally. Okay, I see two errors here. You have the exaggerated kind of persecuted Christian response, which is always hypersensitive, always overreacting to everything the world does, not understanding that the world is going to be the world and you just got to suffer through it. At worst, this would be polite persecution. It's not like somebody came to get you and all this, but I mean, people were upset, which I understand being upset about it. So that's the first error. The second error in addressing stuff like this in general is the people that I call secular apologist Christians, right? The secular apologist Christian is always defending secular progressivism against the church, is always sees nothing wrong with anything secular progressivism ever does, and you can kind of tell kind of seeking validation through their commentary that goes against the church. So they love to correct the church. They love to look like, hey, I'm not like those guys. I'm more like you. I'm a Christian, but I'm not like that, right? And so those are the ones that are always like, you guys are always overreacting. Why do you care? Blah, blah, blah. So those are the two kind of reactions that I saw out there. And you see on almost all issues, whether it's transgenderism by itself or any of that, you see these two reactions, and I think there's a better way to go about it. Now, I'm going to get to you. The question that a lot of people asked was this about the Greek god Dionysus or was this about the Last Supper? I've seen both. So something that I watched did say that I guess the committee came out and apologized at some point. And then even one of the performers said that they thought that this was posted something that we were kind of mocking the Last Supper, and then but everybody came and said no, this was Dionysus or whatever his name is. Here's what I would suggest: perhaps it was both. Artists, I don't know about you guys, hold on to your seats. Artists do this weird thing where they can have a double meaning, right? So they could be doing two things at once, and I think people are missing that it could have been both and might have been both, and you have an excuse there, but you also get to make your statement, which I think is a very poor statement, but the world is the world. It didn't do anything to bring God down any notches, and so go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think to suggest that there was no sort of reference to the Last Supper is intellectually dishonest, right? But that sort of multiple valences is something that we see in art. I think that we missed the conversation because, like, where you started, this was inappropriate, right, for something that is supposed to be family-centered and family-welcoming. And instead of the church having that conversation, we had 3 days of conversation about whether they were mocking, not really the Last Supper, but mocking Da Vinci's portrayal of the Last Supper, which is not even really the Last Supper. I mean, it is itself an artistic
That's a good point.
presentation, a bit more respectful, I would argue. But we were having the wrong conversation. I think that two things that I see wrong with the way you approach this conversation. Number one is that the way a lot of Christians responded to this demonstrated a concern for ourselves and our dogma and doctrine and treasure more than a concern for our neighbor, right? So we weren't having a conversation about, somebody was sitting there watching that with their 7-year-old. And you violated somebody's household, and that was inappropriate for the environment. We weren't having that conversation. We were so caught up in, somebody offended us. And then, generally speaking, I think we see this in a lot of these situations, this sort of spirit of offense and response, like quick rage, is just very not biblical, not Christian, does not come from the Holy Spirit. It's like we have it in James, right? We should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And why? Because the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And so when we rage, we miss a lot of things. And I personally think that we have to regain as the church this capacity for what I call public lament, right? And you see this all the way back from the martyrs to like monks in medieval times. This is the spirit of nonviolent resistance and civil rights, is public lament. It's this idea when something is unrighteous in the culture, we don't rage over it, we lament over it. And when we do public lament, it is a form of protest, but it's much more winsome than rage.
Yeah, because I could probably bet they could have anticipated or predicted that would have been the response. We probably don't want to give them the response that actually shines a light on what they were doing. There's a more shrewd way to go about it for certain. But again, I would wherever you land on this is where you land on it. But I would be critical. Look at yourself and critique whether you are kind of the exaggerated, persecuted Christian, or you're the secular apologist Christian who's always looking for something to critique the church over and to kind of say, no, what's going on isn't that bad. It's not bad at all. You're just overreacting.
Yes, the world is
and if you are one of those, just kind of look at your motivations for being that. You know what I mean? All right, next subject. A lot was going on this week as far as interviews. Yeah. So one of the interviews that happened this week was the National Association of Black Journalists interviewed Trump.
Yes. In my home.
A lot of people, especially people that were connected to Harris's campaign, had a lot of criticism, or who were supporters of Harris's campaign, had a lot of criticism of that black organization for even interviewing Trump. Yeah. I'm not going to go deep into where I stand on it, because I went over that in the last episode of the Church Politics Podcast. But I will say, when somebody is a president who half of America is going to vote for, journalists are supposed to interview them. Yeah. So I think it was a very partisan attack, and for people who act like they care about black institutions, to attack that institution that way was silly. But part of the interview, they asked Trump something about Harris, and basically he goes into a rant about he didn't even know that she was black, that he thought she was Indian and all these other things. And to be honest, that whole conversation is not serious to me. Like, it's not a substantive point to me. Her race has nothing to do with her character. Her race has nothing to do with her competence. And that's what we really want to get at. But we do see in one way or another people on each side kind of touching on that for their own interest and for their own reasons. Now, part of what I think Trump was trying to do was strategic. And part of it might have been about race, but a part of it was he was trying to say that she's fake and phony, right? Like, he was trying to give people something to say, this is how we're trying to brand her. And even some people in the black community have been saying that, and there's a big battle about it. Yeah. He wanted to add on to that because they're going to paint her as fake and phony. You guys decide what you believe. I think that's part of what he was trying to do. I also mentioned this before I hand it to you. People were outraged about what Trump said. I get it. A lot of those folks weren't outraged when Biden said, you ain't black if you don't vote for me.
Hello.
So I think there's some selective outrage here, and how we're dealing with it. But what were your thoughts about the Trump questioning Harris's blackness?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was part of an attack. And I will say this. Race is a part of this election. Both sides are putting it on the table, right? Part of the Trump campaign strategy is to paint Harris as fake, phony, empty, you can't trust her. And if she has presented herself differently, presented her biracial race differently in different political situations for political gain, I think that is fair game. Trump is a marketer. There's this marketing technique called racking the shotgun, right? So rack the shotgun is like a guy's at a bar, he wants to know how many gangsters are in here, so he racks a shotgun up under the table. Some people won't know the sound. Those are not his people. Some people will know the sound and they'll freak out. Those are not his people. Some people will hear the sound and they'll be chill and get ready to fire back. Those are his people. Racking the shotgun polarizes the environment, and Donald Trump is very, very good at racking the shotgun. Because there are people, I've actually spoken to a person who was in that room, who is a black person, who was like, I'm glad he said what everybody wanted to say and nobody will say. And there are going to be some people who are offended by it, but those are not his people. He's racking the shotgun to find his people. That's his strategy. I don't know if racking the shotgun is good political strategy ultimately. because it polarizes the environment. But I think if you look at Trump's approach from his VP pick to this interview, if you listen to him on this stump, I think that the strategy here is to really polarize the environment, and they think they can turn out more of their people than the other side.
Yeah, I think that is going to be part of their strategy, but they need something more too. One thing, if you guys don't watch, if you're on Instagram, I would ask you to watch my Civic updates. So once or twice a week, I'll just give an update of what's going on. It'll be a short, probably 5-minute update about what's going on in politics, something on politics. One of the things that I talked about was the Harris campaign did get off to a very good start.
They did.
Right? You could tell that once, that decision was made, they lifted off. She didn't have to get her own campaign team. It was all baked in. And it gave a lot of Democrats energy. Now, when I said that, people were like, oh, you've endorsed her. I just said that they did a good job. We don't endorse. The AND campaign doesn't endorse. You figure that out on your own. But if somebody does a good job, we say they did a really good job on that. And what it showed me was Trump's campaign is going to have to find another angle for attack. It can't just be about identity. He did hit on the competence. I think they're going to hit on that a lot. But it has to be bigger than just the insults, because I think the insults that are very personal is really going to get her side. I mean, it may be a benefit to her side even more.
I think so. I mean, we had this on the podcast right after they announced Harris as the nominee. I said that if the Trump campaign, and more so Donald Trump, because you have a campaign, but the candidate has to be able to execute the strategy. If the Trump campaign can stick with you can't trust her and she's not tested, they will win. But I said on that podcast, and I'll reaffirm today because I think we're seeing it, I said if they can resist the urge to reach for the identity stuff and the personal attacks, they'll win. If they can't resist that urge, they're going to make it more difficult for themselves. And, I think you see that playing out.
Yeah, he's already stepped on his momentum. I mean, he had tons of momentum coming off of the assassination attempt. That's just the way that Americans are. But then he goes and does his speech at the RNC and goes off script, and it was really bad. And I think he lost a lot of the momentum.
It was the only thing bad at the RNC.
The only thing bad. And if you so what I'm saying, the connection to that is the lack of discipline to stick to a plan, because you don't have a lot of time to characterize her or expose her if that's what you're going to do. You better do it in a disciplined way.
I'm sure the talking points for this event was to come out there and say something along the lines of, look, I know a lot of people here don't like me, but I'm always the same guy. Mm-hmm. This lady is not always the same person. She's a different person. In California, she's Indian. In Chicago, she's black. That's a very different thing than the way he approached it. Yeah. And I don't know if he can learn that in the next 100 days.
We will find out. One other thing that I pointed out, and this leads into the next segment, one other thing that I pointed out in one of my last Civic updates is that this campaign in general is about vibes and identity right now. Yeah. Right? I like this person. I'm feeling good about the energy in this group. I'm really excited because my affinity group is here. I'm really excited because J.D. Vance did this or whatever. What I challenge people to do, and what I'm challenging all you guys to do from here on out, is make it about policy. Because vibes and identity is not going to help us through a lot of the issues that Americans are suffering from right now, whether it's housing, whether it's the economy, and so on. If you vote on vibes and identity, I think you've done yourself and your neighbor a disservice. Amen. Let's make them focus on policy. And if we have conversations, it should be about policy. So let's talk about policy. One of the criticisms of Trump is that he ran this very populist campaign the first time. Then he gets in office, and one of the biggest things that he did was give a tax break. So he ran a very populist campaign, basically coming against the establishment for Reaganomics and all that stuff. But then he gets in there, and he's basically just an established Republican, except for probably his foreign policy. But on financial policy, that's what he was. Interesting article I sent you, and that I've been really thinking about quite a bit, comes from this interview in the Financial Times. And they interviewed this guy named James Fontella Khan. And what the name of the interview was, Why Wall Street Chose Kamala. Mm-hmm. Right? And it was basically saying all her ties to Wall Street through her husband's brother, through her sister, that Wall Street felt that she would be the right person to reverse some of the things that Biden is actually doing. if you guys listen to us quite a bit, whether you like it or not, one of the things that Biden has done is he has actually started to enforce antitrust laws, whereas Clinton, Obama, and Trump didn't do that for decades. It just was not enforced, and so you had all these mergers that didn't make sense. That's why Ticketmaster can charge you anything that they want because they have no competition. And so what ends up happening is they can charge you more without bringing you a better product. That's not good for consumers. It's also not good for capitalism in general, right? So the question is, one of the things that I think it's LinkedIn's founder is one of the people that was like, hey, we're with Harris, and one of the things I want Harris to do is get rid of Lena Khan. Lena Khan's over the FTC. She's the one that's actually bringing these suits and enforcing antitrust law. And just so you know, antitrust law is basically saying it forces corporations to treat consumers properly. It doesn't let you combine, 50 different companies and corporations and just charge the consumer anything, right? That's what antitrust is about, and we can get deeper into it at another time. Maybe we'll do a shorter a version of that. But she's been enforcing these laws so corporations can't take advantage of consumers. Now, that's what Biden has been doing. I think that's the best thing. I have many disagreements with the Biden campaign. That's the best thing they've done, in my opinion. Now, these corporate leaders are coming to Kamala and saying, you're our person. We need you to get rid of Lena Khan. So with all the vibes out there, with all the identity stuff out there, these are the type of things we need to look at. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump is going to do any better, right, but it's something to pay attention to, because if a corporation can just come in and say, hey, I want you to change this policy, I'm going to give you this much amount of money, it doesn't say much about it. That doesn't stand too well with our democracy and where money, how much power money brings people when it comes to this democracy. But what are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I thought the interview was insightful. I recommend people go and look at this, because this is one of those things that I
and we'll put it in the show
about.
notes too.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I care about a lot, and I agree with you. I think that this is one of the things, one of the few things, honestly, that I agree with Biden on. I think he's accomplished, or at least done well. Is I would say, in a lot of ways, sort of domestic financial policy, because you got Lena Khan, but Biden's SEC, Biden's Labor Relations Board, his NLRB, these have been great entities to really try to rebalance, the sort of relations of power between corporate interests, hyper-wealthy interests, and the interests of the average working person. These are things that take many more than 3.5 years to correct. As you said, we've seen decades, almost a half century of this running in this direction, so you're not going to fix it in 3.5 years. And Trump was actually winning Wall Street, right? He was getting all the money. He was getting their support when it was Trump-Biden. What you see in this interview is that when Wall Street saw it go from Trump-Biden to Biden-Harris, especially with Trump picking J.D. Vance, who is a person who really pays more attention to how do we bring labor around, he actually complimented Lena Khan specifically. And so his sort of economic valence, paired with Harris going to the top of the ticket on the Democrat side, made Wall Street and Silicon Valley turn their money from Trump to now Harris. And these are huge, huge issues. I would love to see people have some kind of a petition to keep Lena Khan and Cantor and folks like that, no matter who the administration is, because I think right now both of them have taken way too much money from corporate interest, that we could see an undoing of what Biden set in place, no matter who gets elected.
And it's interesting that Hoffman Reed, who is the founder of LinkedIn, is saying this out loud. He's going to the media and saying, hey, she's our person. I want her to get rid of Lena Khan. You would think he would do that behind the scenes.
Right.
There's something strategic about him putting her out there to the public in that way, just to let them know this is where this is going. And maybe it's to let the Republicans know, hey, you brought in J.D. Vance. this is a reaction to that. I'm not exactly sure what he's doing, but usually you would think they would do that behind the scenes rather than putting it out there and perhaps making it more difficult for Kamala. I mean, she's going to have trouble with the left, with Shapiro. Mm-hmm. She's going to have even more trouble now when it comes to this issue, and he's kind of putting it out there. One thing I want, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I've seen a couple of articles, and it's in this little bit where the Wall Street guys are kind of beefing with the Silicon Valley guys because the California guys are kind of new to this, and the Wall Street guys are true to this, and they're like, we don't do it like that. Like, we don't say it in public. We do it behind the scenes. So they want Silicon Valley to be quiet.
And the funny thing is, so Hoffman Reed came out, and they were like, don't you think it's weird for you to be saying that basically you're going to connecting your donation to her on the idea that she needs to get rid of Lena Khan? And this is what he said. He said, well, I separate my expertise and my advice on those things from my from me being a donor. Yeah. And everybody was like, there's only one you, bro. Right. There's no separation between those two things, but nice try. One thing that G.K. Chesterton said, who is a Christian theologian, is that we don't want government or corporations to have too much power. Both of them need to check each other and also be checked by the people. Mm-hmm. And so, especially on the left, when we talk so much about saving democracy, this is a saving democracy issue. Yeah. If our government is too controlled by corporations, or if the people think our government is too controlled by corporations, that hurts our democracy. So we've said this over and over again. And the truth of the matter is, even Adam Smith knew that you did not want unchecked corporations. Yeah. Right? The father of capitalism didn't create capitalism for it to be that. And for people who think capitalism can do some very good things or not anti-capitalism, I would say that not leaving that check, on whether it's Lena Khan or somebody else, not having FTC check corporations is going to really hurt us down the road, because I would say that corporations already have too much power. And it's not everybody, but there's a group of them that I think have an outsized voice based on how much money they put into politics.
Yeah, I mean, you can look over American history, you can look over broader Western history, and see that when wealth concentrates too much in the hands of too few people, it is not good for democracy, it is not good for capitalism, is not good for Western society. And so getting a hold of this, I think, is one of the most important things that we have to do in our generation. And so it is alarming to me that now you have two candidates who are, at this point, basically beholden to these corporate interests. And it is in our interest, I would suggest, to have conversation around this policy issue in our local communities and let that bubble up to the election.
Here's the thing. There's a lot of pastors, especially in the black community, that are supporting Harris, and I get it. They have the power to call this out and say, you better not get rid of Lena Khan, and you better not just carry the water of these corporations. Yeah. You can do that and support her, and you have the power to do that. The question is, will we do it, or do we feel it's just our responsibility to just go along with what she's and support? Yeah. There's some on both sides. I think there's people who are in the church that feel like, I like this person so much, my only job is to support them. That is very naive politics. Yeah. That's not your sister, that's not your friend, that's a politician. And while you're just supporting her, somebody else is pushing her. Yeah. So if we're not going to be more sophisticated than that, then maybe, we deserve what we get. But I think on both sides of the aisle, there are Christians in a position to push back, to say, hey, we don't have to do anything just to simply hurt corporations. It's not about that, but we do need to make sure that there's some balance and some order within our democracy.
Yeah, for sure. I think, we talk about it in our civic disciplines. If you're supporting Harris or you're supporting Trump, you've got much more access, but also more responsibility to hold their feet to the fire on the issues where they are, getting it wrong.
Absolutely. Well, we've said enough, but we want to hear what you guys want to hear us say and do a little Q&A. So let us know how we can get that Q&A going, and we'll start answering these questions. What do you want to learn? What do you want to hear from us? It could be something that we just talked about today on one of these issues, or it could be another issue that you've been wondering about and say, how does this, how could I apply biblical principles to this or that? Some of this is just opinion, some of this is application.
Okay, so I have a question. I know that as Christians, we don't have allegiance to one political party, and we shouldn't just be about making everything single line issue voting. Or, I mean, I guess you can, but you don't have to force Christians to vote a specific way. But something that I've heard people use as kind of reasoning behind why you should vote one party is abortion, and say that it's more than just other issues because it is life and death. So, I guess, how would you, explain that and explain why there's more complexity to that?
No, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of Christians struggle with that, and I think it should be somewhat of a struggle. I think abortion is a very serious issue. I think as Christians, we should care about unborn life. And so if somebody comes to me and says, that's my primary issue, I understand that's your primary issue. I personally don't think it should be the only issue you vote on. And here's one of the reasons for that. There are other issues that play into that issue. That issue is not on an island. And so when we look at most women who say they have abortions because they don't think they can afford the child, then we need to think about, well, how can we help them when it comes to child care or when it comes to our healthcare system, which is terrible. Our healthcare system is awful. There's no way that it should be like this, but you have one side who doesn't want to have any limits on abortion, and then you have Republicans who have not come up with a legitimate healthcare plan since when? Forever. Yeah. That's irresponsible. I would say almost that's legislative malpractice. For you to be a legislator there for that long and you don't want to put a real idea that can move forward, you just want to talk about Obamacare. Obamacare has a lot of flaws, and I think they went about it the wrong way. However, if you don't have an alternative, then that's a big issue. Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come at this I don't know if this is an answer, but more inviting you into my process, because in Chicago, being pro-life is a thing, and it marks you as a particular way. And so I've spent a lot of my sort of political life being that pro-life Democrat guy. And I stood up in a press conference on the day that Roe was overturned, celebrating that victory as I saw it, and I suppose as I see it. But what I've been wrestling with in the years since that is two results of Roe being overturned. The rate of abortions went up, and the number of pro-abortion people increased, and the number of pro-life people decreased. So our movement shrunk, and the outcomes that we're trying to pursue increased. And so I think as a movement, we have to be wrestling with that as a pro-life movement. As the church, we have to be wrestling with that. And what are the implications of kind of single issue voting in that whole discourse? So again, that's not an answer, but it's where I am.
Yeah, and I would just say that too, there's people who vote just on abortion, there's people who vote just on race. I think you're limiting yourself and you're not considering how a lot of issues play into another issue. And so I think you need to look at all the issues. The best thing I would suggest is take your top 6 to 10 issues, list them out, and see what candidate falls the closest to those issues. Because AND Campaign truly believes it's not just about taking a side. That's simplistic. That is just giving your vote to one side or another. It's taking the right positions. That's what this is about.
Yeah, so you mentioned, I think I don't want to misrepresent what you said. So you mentioned about giving them more than giving any political person, right, either side, more than the one issue, right? So I think one of the issues that exists is reparations. There is a lot of conversation about, okay, so what are you going to do for Black people that is just for Black people, that Black people can be the benefit of? So not to that's kind of prefacing the question. that reparations are obviously a non-starter politically. What is the I guess the Trojan horse of getting something done for Black people? What kind of conversation can we have that's not necessarily like financial, like money reparations, but things that benefit Black communities, Black people, Black children? Like, what kind of conversations can we be starting to get some momentum on Black people being represented responsibly and respectfully, whether it be on the Republican side or the Democrat side? What does that conversation look like?
There's a few different views on that. So some would say, I think your progressive leftists would say, like your new progressive leftists would say, people automatically reject any type of policy that's just for one group of people. You're just not going to get it through, period. That's the fact. However, if you focus on class, if you focus on people at a certain socioeconomic level, it's not just for Black people, but a lot of them will be helped, right? Whereas otherwise, if you just make it from one group, not only are you not going to get it in, on two, you're giving it to a lot of people that may not need it. Because we might not talk about a lot of it, but most Black people aren't poor. So if you focus on the poor, you're going to touch a lot of people who need it most. Otherwise, it's not going anywhere. So that's one point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a prevailing point of view. I also think that in the Black community, you got to wrestle with, in a lot of spaces of the Black community, let me not speak as a monolith, timeliness on that issue, and the fact that we have given, I mean, half a century, maybe more, to one party that was not in pursuit of that objective, almost in any way. And so now when you come back to this conversation, it's much more difficult to sort out, like, when we say Black, are we talking about Black person, color of your skin? Are you talking about slave descendant persons? How do you sort out who's slave descendant? How do you do it in a way where you're not giving, somebody who's sitting up with a couple of degrees in a podcast and making, decent money? I'm talking about Justin. But how do you make sure that you're not, giving it to people who don't need it? So I think it's a fraught conversation. And so I'm probably part of that set that's like the best we can do. While I understand the heart and probably agree with the heart, I think the most politically palatable approach is to get a party focused on actually doing stuff for working class and working poor people, which we do not have in the United States right now. Neither party.
Not at all. Which is part of the conversation that we just had, right? The other thing I would say is you can get smaller benefits, right? For instance, the money that's gone to HBCUs. Trump and I think Biden have done things like that. And so I think you can get pieces here and there, but something bigger, people just reject the idea of it being based on those kind of criteria.
And if I can say one last thing, I do think that the reparations community plays an important part in the overall process. I do a lot of work on education reform, and I'm always trying to push forward like the complete, like 100% voucher people. Because I'm like, one, I wouldn't be mad if they succeed, and two, as long as they're out there, it's going to make like charter schools and tax credit programs a lot more palatable.
And plus, they represent a just point of view. I mean, people who were in slavery never got, what they were supposed to get. And so it's always important to set that standard, say, no, what would justice say? Even if we're not going to get it, let's not take off the table what justice would have be done. Any other questions?
Hi, sorry. Justin, the most recent podcast you did was on Project 2025, and thank you for that insight. I was wondering if you could give maybe just like a 1-minute recap of what that was. And then, Chris, I missed your voice on that, so I'd love to hear what you have to say, too.
Is this a setup? 1 minute for Project 2025? What do y'all think? Should I attempt it, or is this a setup? So basically, we took a while to talk about Project 2025 because it was such a big issue, And me not being ideologically conservative, me being a little more moderate, I probably wasn't the best person to talk about it because I'm not a Heritage Foundation person. But basically, Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank, got all these groups together, all these conservative right-wing groups together to come up with a plan to get the government staff, because one of the issues is when Republicans get in there, most of the staff in administrative agencies are probably progressive. That becomes a problem because it's not just about the law, it's how you administer the law is just important as the law itself. So they want to get their own people in there, but they also had some policies that I would say would not be palatable for most normie Americans, right? And so what I think happened is the Democrats seized upon that. They took the most extreme things that they had in there, and it's their fault they put them in there, right? They put some very extreme things in there, and Democrats said Project 2025. It became this big myth.
That's also
that
a terrible name.
It was a
They
terrible
should've went
name.
with a better
Yeah, it was
consultant.
because it went along with the myth, like this big. And so what I said in the podcast the other day is, I don't agree with it. I think it's dangerous. I think that it would not help a lot of Americans if we went about it that way. For instance, just getting rid of the Department of Education things. That's not cool. Like, that's oversight, that's potential funding for schools that need it, and just to check on them. I don't like that, and similar things in there, right? However, I have to have the nuance and the intellectual honesty to say, I don't think this is something that automatically ends. From what I read, and even from the conservative commentators that I respect, I don't think that it's something that's just gonna end democracy. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily like Heritage, but I don't think they're the type of organization that wants to end democracy. They have some bad ideas. And I think it was seized upon by folks on the left to scare people to death, because you see a lot of these memes and all that, and people are learning about Project 2025, not because they read it, but because they saw a meme. Is it bad? To me, yes, a lot of bad policy. Is it the end of democracy, and is it demonic? I think that's going too far. So that, in a nutshell, that's what I said. If I get in trouble for this, I need your name and your number. Right. Somebody's going to run this back and say, he supports Project 2025.
I will speak for 30 seconds in defense of Project 2025, because one of the issues that's very important to me is good government. And I think that at the basic level, there is something wrong with an administrative state that is not accountable to the elected executive. And so the only way to staff the size of government that we have responsibly, without having people with like the professional background required to do stuff in the administrative state, the only way to do that quickly is to have an entity that works on a sort of potential administration, which Democrats do this too.
The strategy is smart. Yeah.
The strategy is smart, and I think there's something to it. Like, you don't have to agree with Project 2025 to agree with the idea that you shouldn't be able to have a president get elected talking about doing certain things, and then have people who work essentially for the president and the executive branch who will resist his doing the things that he got elected.
I'm going to have to stop you because Christy looks like she's about to beat me up.
Yes. We got much better people to listen to right now.
We have some pastors that we're going to bring up. How are we? Are they going to sit on the sides here? Okay.
Oh, sweet.
Okay.
So we have some local leaders, pastors, who we want to chat with here in Akron and to hear from for our national audience. So we want to invite Pastor Kent Boyd and Pastor Daren Brake to join us up here.
Come on up, brothers. We appreciate
we got
you.
microphones.
Give him a hand clap. That's right. That's right. That's right.
So Pastor Kent Boyd, affectionately known as Coach, and not only just known that way, he is a coach. He is the executive director of Love Akron, the head coach of the Garfield Kenmore football team, and pastor of Garden City Church. Let's give Pastor Kent Boyd a round of applause. And Pastor Daren Brake is the lead pastor at the House of the Lord Church here in Akron. He leads local missions, Christian education, prison reentry, and other stuff that I didn't even list out. He also serves on the board of several organizations, including Love Akron. Let's give Pastor Daren Brake a round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
And if I can, I want to start this conversation off on a negative note. You know, in Georgia, we say y'all ain't play no football in Ohio. We would say.
I would agree with you. I lived in Georgia. I'm from the South, brother, so I would agree.
Okay, cool,
I would agree with you. 100%.
See, it's a point of agreement.
I would agree.
Won't he do it? Let's go. All right, Chris.
So, Justin mentioned it earlier, and we've been talking about this all over, everywhere we've been in the country. This idea that if you work in a local congregation, with the local congregation, and even congregations working together in a local community, the impact that you can have on the lives of people in that local community can be greater than the impact of the person who gets elected president of the United States. And I firmly believe that. But I would love to start this conversation just having each one of you all, one, just give us a minute on your work and what you do here in Akron, and then respond to that. Do you agree with that assessment or disagree with that assessment?
All right, I guess I'll go first. Locally, you know, I'm the lead pastor of the House of the Lord. We are celebrating 50 years in the Akron community. And I am the second pastor coming in. So we've had, even our founder, he's still around to this day. So we have a long history and a lot of ties to the Akron community. I think there is a lot of, in the work that we're doing, I guess I could sum it up with the fact that we are looking to be a church that is loving, inspiring, and hospitable. Is that to be the words that define who we are? And what should flow out of that is the fact that we are a teaching church. We believe in holistic ministry, and we are a partnering church so that we can scale impact. So that's kind of give you some context of who we are and what we do. To your point, I do think that the local church can have a larger impact. To me, I think one of the sticking points to that becoming a reality is the lack of attachment people have to the local church. Attachment is formative. What you love forms you more than anything. So if your love is not, if your attachment is not the local church, then it's not going to be formative. So without that attachment, that's part of the problem, because a lot of people come to church from more of a perspective as a consumer than a community that I'm attached to.
Preach, yeah.
When, you know, we should be doing life together more so than this is a service you pay for.
Amen.
So I think it's true, but if we can get attached, I think that's foundational.
So good.
Coach?
Everything that he said is accurate. No, I agree with Daren. We have a lot of these conversations a lot where we get to talk, and he used the right word, attachment. Another way I'm going to say it is that kind of sticky love, right? When love is sticky, it's hard for us to be separated, to be pulled apart when we have disagreement, right? And that's going to happen. And so I believe from a church perspective, we are an aspiring multi-church at Garden City, meaning that every way that the world wants to separate us and tear us apart, we believe Jesus just wants to bring us together, right? To be able to have all these challenging conversations, right? Democrat, Republican, black, white, male, female, homosexuality, just everything. Like, we want to really incubate and have a space where we can have that conversation and have it in love without people just running out the door and feeling like, hey, man, I'm going to be just judged here. Because something that we talk about a lot is when pain and hurt is not transformed, it just gets transmitted. And that's what we see a lot that's happening in our society. And I believe that from a standpoint of Love Akron, it continues, right? It's in our DNA to really get with people, to have some of these challenging conversations, to where saying, hey, as long as we're talking, then that's a good thing. But the moment we stop talking, that's when I go off to my corner, you go off into your corner, and now I get around, if you will, and I kind of hate this term, like-minded people. Because I don't really understand what that means. When I hear the term like-minded people, it's just like, oh, people that simply agree with you, right? And we have that agreement to where it's no longer uncomfortable. I just believe the God of the universe didn't create us to be comfortable, period. He didn't. He didn't create us to be comfortable. So we have to be willing to lean into the discomfort of situations a little bit more. And so I really get the opportunity not only to see this at, if you will, corporate levels, which we'll call like high-level leadership, whatever that defines and what that means, but also with the young men that I get to coach who are experiencing life on a daily basis. So when we talk about public safety, to me, they're the experts on public safety. Believe it or not, they're the experts on public safety. But we don't create spaces to hear from them their opinions about public safety. Why? Because they're just kids. And what do they know? Well, they're experiencing a lot more death of loved ones than I am. Amen. They see their classmates. They see cousins, uncles who have been shot and killed. I can tell you right now, as a head football coach, I've been to more funerals of my players than I have in my own family. Right? Some I've coached. Some of it happened to them that I go and support them through that. And so when I think about the local church, we have an awesome opportunity and responsibility. And me and Pastor Daren were talking about this back. But here's the thing: if I'm unwilling to lose, if I'm not willing to lose my photo op or my name in the paper, then I'm not going to have these uncomfortable conversations. I'm not going to challenge or leverage the relationship that I have with political figures. And so I'm a self-proclaimed not a political person, which is really, really funny, because the moment you say something like that to God, he begins to put you in all these political spaces. Right. Because why? He does not call those who are qualified. He calls those that are not.
Come on now.
Right?
Yep.
And so now being in this space from a Citizens Police Oversight Board and serving as chair, that has put me in the middle of city council. It has put me in the middle of the mayor. It has put me in the middle of the police chief, the fire chief, and all these different entities and people. And what I'm learning is they don't get along and they don't see eye to eye. So here's the thing, people of God. I think the scripture says, "Send me, Lord, I'll go." We have to be willing to be sent. And being sent is only half of it. Are we willing to go?
That's excellent. Let me ask him one question, because I'm a coach too. And, I've tried to walk away from it, but I just can't walk away from it. It's tough. It's tough. It's tough. Yeah, it's real. And, but let me ask you this. Me and Chris talk a lot about how your public witness is more than your vote. Can you talk to us about how you coaching these kids is part of your public witness?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, man, because they just see me as Coach Boyd. I'm the guy with the whistle. He's crazy. He's going to make us run, right? But the moment I started to really integrate them into my life, I humanized myself to them, right? I've brought them into my home. They've had dinner with us. They understand, like, who my wife is. They see all of my children, and they ask me the question, "Man, how many baby mamas do you have?" I said, "I just got one, and she's my wife." Yeah. But again, I'm not offended because that's their experience, right? So now it brings on a whole different attitude of what I can now, to your point, witness to them. Not from a place of judgment, right? But then two, not only invite them to my home, but let me invite you down to my office on Main Street in downtown Akron. Yeah. Let me invite you to our ribbon cutting that we had in open house, to where you can actually see what, man, Coach Boyd does. Now, not only that, let me invite you to church now. And what they begin to see is I'm really the same everywhere. Amen. Like, I don't switch it up or change it up because I might be in front of the mayor or I might be in front of city council. But they say, "No, man, that's just Coach Boyd." And I know Coach Boyd is going to have not only my back, but he's going to give me the truth and love. And so I think that's how I try to walk out my witness. But that's something that, man, honestly, brother, I really pray about every day, because, man, I don't want to be phony. And I know that is my perception in our city. I would love to sit here and tell you, man, that everybody loves Coach Kemp, Pastor Coach. They don't. Some people might be in this room, amen? Come on now, ain't a lot of shouting. But that's just the truth, man. But I've had to understand and deal with that within myself and be okay with it, right? Because here's the thing, man. I think when God begins to thrust you in these things, we have a responsibility to show that witness constantly and all the time, to them, but also more importantly, man, to my own children. Because like they see the good and the not so good. But we live by values, I think in our home, but also with my coaches, and you can have this, brother. We say, man, no matter what, we're always going to empower and not enable our players, right? The next thing we say is, man, we're going to discipline them, but we're not going to dispose of them, right? The other thing I tell their parents, I say, man, we're going to be really, really demanding of them, but we're not going to demean them. And my witness is when I do that, I go and I get it right with them. I apologize, because old school wise, that didn't happen to me. My dad ain't never apologized to me, let alone a coach, right? But if we're going to have these values and they're going to be front facing, when I break one of those values, I got to be willing to apologize. And that's probably my greatest witness.
And that's a great example. Amen. Thank you, though. That's great.
Can I piggyback on that? Yeah. I think I'm gonna theologize what you said a little bit. All right?
Thank you, brother.
When we read the Bible and we read it from the perspective of first century Mediterranean people, we're reading a Bible where there isn't this church secular divide that we've created. Right. It's all one. So therefore, like when you talk about like church and politics, that's so relevant, because when the world is in that way, everything Jesus said was a political statement. Yeah. Because there was no divide between the two. So then that goes back to how we live it out in the public square, that then connects, Sunday to Monday. So then we can't so easily leave the sermon and the worship and the music on Sunday and go on Monday and be a banker like I wasn't in church on Sunday.
Yes. Amen. That's real.
But we begin to kind of approach our job as a ministry. When we begin to kind of make that connection and understand that's actually how the Bible is written. That's how they viewed the world, the people who wrote and populate the pages of the Bible.
Yeah, for sure. Jesus is Lord is a radically political statement. One of the things I'm really interested in, especially thinking about this idea of attachment. Tip O'Neill, way back in yesteryear, said this phrase that all politics is local. And I would argue that we've lost that with social media and billions of dollars being spent on campaigns. We almost have a situation now where all politics is national. And so you have, neighbor and neighbor actually arguing over a national election that really, when you look over history, rarely changes the fundamentals of how you live your day-to-day life. How do you recover? How do we work to recover that kind of attention to localism when so much money and media has been targeted to pull people to national?
I would say, and they didn't pay me to say this, it's kind of these kind of conversations. It's these kind of conversations that then can prepare and help local congregations have those kind of conversations, especially in an environment where local news is hard to get. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, we had like Akron news, and there was people on TV that gave us Akron. That doesn't happen now. So the issues is harder to get the information, which we need to be attached more so that we can really put the attention towards what's happening in our backyards, and not spend so much time, arguing over something that's happening nationally, but understanding that these are my people. Yeah. This is who I'm doing life with. This is the community. I was at an event earlier today, and the guy defined community as common unity. And when we look at it like that, that's where I think we can start, is through the work that I'm seeing that you guys are doing, but then also in having that same kind of conversation at a local level.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to say this because me and Daren were talking about this in the back, and so I'm putting this out here now just to put pressure. Not on us, but on y'all. All right. So we were back there talking. It was like, man, this is really good, right? But here's what we know. In January, there's going to be, whoever's elected, there's going to be an inauguration, right? And then there's going to be the first 100 days. How do you guys come back, and how do we venture into the first 100 days? right? Not from a strictly political perspective, but what does the first 100 days of the year look like for the church? And how we're going to run out the year, right? And not shy away from the political conversation, but what is it going to look like for us in those first 100 days? And so, man, we'd love to have y'all back to talk about the first 100 days. Because here's the thing, there's a lot of things going on, I think, locally when I think about politics, right? There's going to be a collective bargaining discussion that's going to be happening between our mayor and the FOP, which is the union and the police. And what's happened here over the course, I would say, of the past 3 years here in our city with some of the police shootings, some of the police behavior, and here's what I'm not saying. All police are not bad. They're not. But policing is like teaching. There's some really good teachers, and we all know some bad ones, right? And so what does that look like for us to present, if you will, from a community perspective? What are some of those recommendations that we want to see the mayor take to the table, to the bargaining table? What does that really look like from a community perspective? Not just from a perspective of, hey, I don't want to have to pay them more money. But what does that really look like to help to build the bridge of trust?
And what does that look like for diverse churches in Akron to come together and say, this is what we want together?
Yep.
Spanning different parties and all that. That's powerful.
Yeah.
And maybe it's providence to some extent that you have Christians on both sides of the aisle, because if we did come together, we could get a lot of good done for our neighbors. Let me ask one last question. What do you two think the biggest issue is in Akron that you would like the church to step in on or be more engaged on? Had to put the pressure back on you, brother.
Yeah, you did. Oh, man. Say that again.
Number one issue.
I know it's a complicated question. What do you think the biggest issue is? If you got to give more than one, that's fine too. That you wish the church would step in on or engage more.
That is a simple, complex question. I think the first thing is I think the church has to engage one another. Because until we as a Big C church do that, it's going to be hard for us to move collectively to really utilize our influence. And I'm intentionally not using the word impact. I don't think impact of and by itself is sustainable. I don't. Impact, though, that is birthed from influence is. So I think, Justin, more of my thing is I think the only way the church is really going to be able to assert their influence in our city is the church has to come together as the church of the city, as Paul talked about when he talked to the Roman. He didn't talk to individual churches. He just talked to the church of the city. Mm-hmm. And I think once we can do that, then we can be able to have you all back and say, hey, here goes the Church of Akron. Mm-hmm. Educate us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what has to happen first before we can attack anything politically.
No, I get that. And once that happens, is there an issue that you would say? Would it be housing, crime? I'm an attorney. So
I appreciate that.
The lawyer
I think the biggest thing that I think needs to be attacked is we have to stop putting bandages on things. We got to get down to the root issue. And so I think the root issue for me is the family. And so that may be housing in the home, right? Because I think the absence of males in the home is a direct reflect of not only the violence that we see, but the overdose deaths that we see and the mental health trauma that we see.
Yeah.
And so I think that as we can get into the home more, and the home is housing, is all the things, I think that's the big thing that I think the church is mandated to see about. The orphans, the widows, the least of these.
We got to talk, because as a coach, I see that too, and we've talked about that being one of the major issues even in Atlanta too.
I agree. I would say, You know, in John 15, Jesus says, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. And that was the statement made before he told them to go out and love one another. And essentially he was saying, you're my people. So I want you to make other people your people. So then you can love them like I've loved you. And that goes to piggyback on what Kemp was saying with the church coming together, where you're my people, whoever you vote for, if we have the same Savior, we should be people. In any family, there's never the same perspective. And with family, you have who you have. You figure it out. So I think the coming together and fundamentally seeing each other not as opponents or opposition, but really genuinely seeing the humanity of the person across from you and seeing them as your people because you have the same Savior is a starting point. And I also like what Kim said about the family. I really do think that's important. I also think we as a country, we love a good comeback story. We love a story of someone who's messed up and then was able to right the ship and have this amazing future. I think the problem is we don't want to help them until they're having that amazing future. So for me, an issue for me is really with like recidivism and how do we help returning citizens who have been impacted by the legal system? How do we help them overcome barriers so that they can be the fathers they want to be? And I think that's the only way we're going to kind of reverse some of the consequences of mass incarceration and those types of things that rob the family, so that we can replace that. So for me, it's the coming together, but I would have to say the family, but also the people who are disconnected from their family but want to be a father, who want to be that uncle, who want to be that responsible citizen, who really just wants a job that pays enough so I can have an apartment. Those are the things that are important for me.
Awesome. Will y'all give a round of applause for these brothers?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Coach, for letting me mess with you a little bit, man. I greatly appreciate your perspective and what you do. Same to you, too. Well, y'all know what it is, Ann Camp. We are happy, love being in Akron, had a wonderful time again. Give Chrissy a round of applause again. Excellent job. Excellent job. And as I always say, Ann Camp, there's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp, we'll holla at you.